Welcome to my home. This will be an open house New York unlike any that we have experienced before. But we hope that we can take advantage of virtually guiding you through this project. Perhaps not being able to share with you in person will allow me to instead give you some insights through this medium that I normally couldn't do with you live. But let's get started. I'm Adam Kushner. I'm a former board member of OHNY. I'm the principal of Kushner Studios, as well as a partner of In-House Group, which is my construction firm, as well as the owner of this place. I live here with my wife and kids, and together, we've just lived through and wrapped up an 8-year transformation of our home. Some have come to visit me here over the course of the renovation, and some of you are visiting me for the first time. We recently received our certificate of occupancy, which is a milestone stating that construction has been completed. Now, we're on to our third act, making it our home. So, we welcome you to 16 Minetta Lane. Take in all that I'm going to share with you, and at some point over the weekend, I'll be doing a live streaming question and answer session. So please bring me questions and comments that you may have. So let's begin our tour. This project began for us about 8 years ago when we sold our beloved place in the West Village on Barrow Street. The time had come to move, and we began to search for a place that would fulfill many needs, not the least of which would be the opportunity to design and build our own home. This is something that I had promised myself I would do at least once in my life, even though technically this would be the second time. We came across this building in a rather fortunate and serendipitous manner. The process itself was captured by a reality TV show, which could be perhaps best said stretch the definition of reality. But fiction aside, we loved the opportunities it offered for both my family and my practice, and after a relatively painless negotiation, we moved in on December 22nd, 2012. It had been used for the prior 3 years as a party and event space, but before that, it was owned by Robert Isabel, the noted interior designer and florist, and he really created what I inherited. The house was known locally and in the press as the Salad House, for the abundance of ivy exuding from the windows. Mr. Isabel was a florist, as I noted, before he segued into using this house as his home and showroom for his furnishings and showcase his interior design talents. We'll show you what it looked like now shortly, but I'll have to say that the ghosts of Mr. Isabel have influenced me and continue to influence me. This is the image that perhaps many of you thought you were coming to see, as this was a well-photographed and well-published shot. This is the current living room and the former bedroom for Mr. Isabel. That is, quite surprisingly, the same space we are currently standing in. From 1992 to 2007, this is what his home looked like while Mr. Isabel lived here. This would be his bachelor pad, his private showroom, and his place of experimentation. Here he is standing in the north courtyard, framed by what was once the entry corridor used to bring horses to the back house. But we will dive into the deeper history of this building and site in just a moment. In the first days of 2013, I began this as I do most projects, with an open sheaf of blank paper. I usually begin with words and gut feelings. I thought about the relationship to the neighborhood, to the sky, to the city itself. This took on an especially weighty tone since it's the definition of personal. This project will be the physical manifestation of who I am, and by extension, will define myself and my family. Winston Churchill said, "We define our houses, and they define us." The fact that the house carried the baggage of being notable only added to the depth of the problem. To give you a sense of the weight and the baggage this place carried, a few years ago, I'm sitting late at night in the bed at the end of the day, just going through my New York magazine. And I turned to this double-page spread and was blown over when I quickly realized that this featured piece was my basement. What the heck? A noted designer chose this very space as one of his most influential spaces. I did follow up with him. He was a lovely guy, and yes, he had been in the house 20+ years ago. And apparently this image stuck with him. But back to the research. I took 2 tracks. The first was to look for some historical fodder, something to rely upon. Perhaps history could give me an insight that I hadn't seen. For one, this property sits on a historical street in a historical and storied neighborhood. I started searching through old maps, mostly archived and available online. I looked at early farm plat maps. This is the Ratzer map from 1766. It's the first time I noticed that the Minetta Brook seemed to be running underneath the property. This was and continues to be a very influential and very rare colonial era map. Around the same era, I find another unsighted map that had a similar brook. I think we are around here. You can see that this is the first time it's called the Minetta Water, eventually to morph into the title, the Minetta Brook. What I started to see was that, in fact, a river ran through it. In fact, right underneath this property. So I thought, that's interesting. This here is the 1865 Veely map, a well-known and rather complete surface and, most importantly, subsurface investigation of Manhattan. I recently purchased my own fine copy of the Veely, and it's one of my treasures that I share with you as well. As an aside, this map, along with a prize Noli map, sparked my interest in collecting maps, which we do have scattered throughout the house. We begin seeing the streets overlaid around the brook, which will eventually would become Minetta Street. I also noted that the course of the Minetta Brook moved and shifted over the last 400 years. There is evidence that it clipped the corner of our site, but I didn't know whether to attribute that more to cartographic error or actually the shifting of the course of the brook. Both very likely possibilities. It was enough that I felt important to pay homage to the missing stream. So this juicy fact and contemporaneous accounts of great oak trees lining the brook seemed to present some opportunities for me. A neighbor recently found this image and sent it to me. As far as I can determine, it's the first photograph of this house. This is from the New York Public Archives and dates back to 1910. This is the 1930 Sanborn map. Of course, by the 1930s, the brook is gone. You can see the two buildings are now represented on our site. A front house and what was to be the stable in the rear, now our back house. And I do have some research on when it disappeared, but still, there was something to all this map readings. Along the way, I was to learn that some of the best trout fishing in Manhattan occurred right down Minetta Street in front of my front door. A short history of this place. The foundations date to the 1840s. There was a one-story structure on the site in the front until about 1918 when an order was issued for its demolition. The next thing I can find was there was a certificate of occupancy was issued in 1925 for a three-story rooming house in the front, and then in 1928 a carriage house in the rear back building was completed. My understanding is that there were 6 residential units in the front building and 2 units in the rear house. It remained this way until Mr. Isabel took over in 1991. I have since been approached by many people who have told me that they have lived here once upon a time. In 1954, Sven Svensson, a Broadway director, actor, and producer, buys the place and lives here until he sells the place to Mr. Isabel in 1992. He had an interesting and colorful life as well. His death, in fact, cannot be determined, and this actually clouded the title to this place, something that even I had to accept as a condition to buying this property. Mr. Isabel takes it upon himself to pretty much gut the place and make it the starting point for what I purchase. He passes away in the house in 2007 under very suspect circumstances as well, and as I noted, it's sold by his estate in 2009. After an ill-fated attempt to turn the place into a restaurant, it ends up being sold to my family at the end of 2012, and that's where my story begins. Actually, one more diversion. In 2007, long before we had considered moving out of Barrow Street, a neighbor invited me to attend a unique fair on Minetta Street. My daughter found this photo recently, and I was astounded. There, 13 years ago, is our home to be, and there we are sitting with my now good friends and neighbors. This festival is something that I am proud to have helped revive, as now I'm a local and a member of our block association. In addition, I hold a key to the city-owned corner park, and it's my job and privilege to shut the park every Sunday night, a civic duty that I've proudly been upholding since I moved here. Back to the research. Concurrent with these studies, Hurricane Sandy had swept through a few months earlier. This is October of 2012. It happened to knock a tree over on some land that I have upstate. In cutting up the tree, I came upon these series of hollows that one finds at the base of many trees. These are natural occurrences and are used by animals and insects alike as places of shelter and hibernation. And I couldn't help but notice that square in front of our building were these beautiful trees that form these series of medieval Gothic arches. With this in mind, I co-opted the idea of living in a tree. The strength and protection afforded by the trunk, the spread canopy allowing light to filter in, the rather random interior poché of the hollow versus the rather symmetrical exterior. These concepts helped inform the design. And if this wasn't proof enough, forcing my hand, here is my daughter playing hide-and-go-seek with me in New Jersey. Unsolicited and I promised unstaged. The die was cast. As I started putting all this to paper, I arrived at a concept which basically looked at the property as 4 facades surrounding a central core that would act as a space of security for my family. One piece would act as a site anchor, heavy and horizontal, using the wall of the carriage house as its backbone. One piece became the curved tree trunk wall, the security to protect our family and offer the membrane in which we made the connection with our neighborhood. One piece would be the wall of vertical circulation connecting the ground to the sky. And the final piece would be a space of memories anchored on its side by a climbing wall, composed of little vignettes of our lives and acting as the climbing holes. I felt there was something rather poignant to that. Now, this poetic part didn't quite come to pass, but on the whole, it still falls into the category of pretty cool things to have in your house. That's my son climbing over the now completed wall on the left. We do have the tallest climbing wall east of Reno, Nevada, and that's sort of cool. It's a bizarre urban experience to climb so high over 6th Avenue and see what's playing at the Waverly Theater. Here is an early bulk model which has since been updated. In responding to the existing building, I decided to not touch the existing facade at all, to firstly, respect its past history and its scale to the neighborhood, but at the same time, acknowledge that history is transient, and now, a new chapter was being written, which is why the bulk of the building sits behind this front wall. Here is what the final facade actually turned out to be. At this point, I'd like to take you on a virtual tour of the place, so come along with me. The main bulk of the building is this insertion that I mentioned, within the existing confines of the original building set back from the front wall, creating this entry courtyard before entering into our main kitchen space. At this point, now that we're in the kitchen, we can either choose to climb the graceful entrance stairs or take the elevator up to the living room or higher. The 3-story high space has a volume that I am trying to maintain from the original Isabel renovation. The courtyard between the carriage house and the main house also will remain unchanged. Basically, the layout is such that I have the main stair on the east side creating the smaller spaces that are servicing the larger spaces to the west side. This idea of service and served very much is out of the Louis Kahn playbook, a man that I think is one of the greatest American architects. This is an interesting space because it is the point where the new vertical addition sits atop the existing building. What we created is basically an outdoor space that is covered by the building above it. It also steps down to correspond to the sloping existing roof trusses that once were part of the original living room. Now comprised of actual green lawn and the beginnings of ivy, this is a direct homage to the trees down Minetta Street and of course to Robert Isabel's famous salad house. I'm also learning that cutting grass in Manhattan is quite a challenge along with actually growing a lawn. The 4th floor holds a few bedrooms and a bathroom en suite. Here we are on the 5th floor, which is our master bedroom. It has a flip-up skylight, a detail that I am retaining from our Barrow Street place that opens the space to the sky. It also has some neat little features like a bit of an urban oasis, our own postage stamp lawn as well as a large drop-down projector TV hidden away. We also have one of the greatest showers views in New York City, I imagine, as to the north we have a clear view of the Empire State Building and the Freedom Tower from the south. Here we are on the roof. We have our lower roof, which is sort of our sunbathing space, and as we make it up to the upper roof, you'll see that we have a rooftop kitchen and barbecue, as well as access to the top of the climbing wall. And out of a sense of professional responsibility, we have active solar panels. Something that I have not shared before is our rear house. It has not been a big part of the prior tours because it was mostly our staging area for the construction work, but now that we've finished, we will quickly work our way through it. We begin at the top with a gym, and a small outdoor space. We work our way down to a mid-level guest room, and finally we end up on the ground floor again with a small reading room, and here in our outdoor space attached to the first floor, remember what I mentioned before about that map error where I wasn't sure whether the river had run under the corner of the property or it was a cartographic error? Well, it turns out that those original maps from 300 years ago were dead accurate. As we were excavating the cellar, we found a well. You could see what we've done. We've turned this once well into a jacuzzi, and you can see our glass window facing the courtyard. Having trees on my brain, I thought I'd share a bit more of my design process and how some details came to be. I was just in Crate and Barrel a couple of days ago, and I came upon this basket of fire logs. I found it funny that what is an incredible abundance upstate, in fact, is treated as a special decoration, a precious object to remind us of our rustic roots. This forced me to pay attention to the many wood piles, which are common to be seen upstate, which serves the very practical and necessary job of fuel storage. And this got me thinking about other uses of cord wood, the character of the light as it passed through it, and how it could be incorporated into the building. In a way, the building now speaks to its historical underpinnings of great trees surrounding the Minetta Brook, while looking forward to a place of conservation, of resources, and contemporary uses. Here you can see our living room, that we have these great stacks of cordwood as well. And these are usable, surrounded by these giant slabs of wood that I hand harvested from the property. And you can also see that this too is beginning to take shape. The idea of the living room was to be considered a forest, and that these 4 large slab pieces of wood would form a cathedral in a way. One side holding the cordwood while the other providing the fire and warmth. And yes, both fireplaces, including the one way off the floor, are working wood-burning fireplaces. We also see this in the floor of the sauna bathroom area in the cellar. This, as it would become, would be one of my greatest sources of failure, as I spent 2 years from cutting down the trees to hand painting the mortar, only to find them all ruined by water that had gotten under the wood. Live and learn, and then do it again. We also can see that the cellar room that had so enamored the New York Magazine editors 2 decades ago. Not to belabor this, but a great red oak fell upstate led to the thought that it could become our entry kitchen counter. I very much believe in combining the handmade and tactile set against the modern and non-visceral, thereby highlighting both by their juxtaposed opposites. This is very much in keeping with the philosophy of the yin and yang, how white is best seen in the presence of black, for example, or how light is best seen in the presence of darkness. I also believe in the act of personal involvement. By hand cutting these large timbers, you gain a real sense of what they're about, their heft, their texture, even their smell. And here are some of the early sketches of what I was thinking about for the kitchen area. And here are the results. Note the working kitchen fireplace. We do use it quite often. On a slightly different bent, we installed a 2 kilowatt solar array out of a sense of professionalism and personal responsibility. Most wood has come directly from our own property upstate, milled on site, and kiln dried in Kingston or from a LEED certified establishment. As I've mentioned, I get a special thrill to be really intimate with the process from tree to installed finishes. We will be living as lightly off the land as we can with the technologies available to us now. I also want to make obvious the fact that we are fully living here and have always lived here. You are witness to our home, and despite cleaning up in preparation for your virtual arrivals, we still have not made this a museum. This is how we live and where we live, and we, or at least I, have no issue showing you the imperfection and fails of this house as well as its successes. This is all part of the process that I'm sharing with you. So why do I even do this? Business opportunities? Not really. Rather, I feel compelled to share what I've done with the public in hopes that perhaps you can come away with a different understanding of how one can live in an urban environment, a bit more in sync with the natural world we all inhabit, and perhaps a bit more gently upon the earth. Thanks for listening. And a big thanks for Open House New York for creating just these opportunities. I'd like to also end with a 2-part request. The first is to please go to Open House New York's website and contribute something to a great cause. I do this out of a love for my craft, but they are an extraordinary organization, one that I was proud to serve on their board for many years, and they are hurting like so many others are. Anything you could donate would be appreciated. My second request is to join me virtually on Open House New York Saturday at 2 p.m. You'll find the link to my live stream Zoom chat on the Open House New York website. I'd love to answer any questions you may have. And if this is impossible, please do not hesitate to send me a personal email, and my contact information will follow after this. Thanks again for allowing me to share a decade-long and counting labor of love, and enjoy your open house weekend. Thank you.